You're watching BreakThru News.
I'm Charlotte thun-hohenstein, and you're watching BreakThru News on BTR today. Today we're talking about Sweden's recent recognition of Palestine as its own independent state. So this happened this past Friday on October the 3rd. With me to discuss this is John Neffel of BTR's Radio Dispatch. Thank you, John, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Becoming a regular. So as I mentioned, this past Friday, Sweden recognized Palestine. Most basic question, because it's obviously been stirring a lot of controversy. Why is this such a big deal? Because actually there are quite a few countries, about 100 or so, that already recognize Palestine as a state. So what's different?
Yeah, and there are several countries in Europe that recognize Palestine as a state also, although this is the first time that a major European Union country has recognized the state of Palestine. The previous ones who are part of the Union recognized Palestine before joining, which it may seem like a sort of academic distinction, but I do think that it's significant in this case, and I think part of the international reaction really shows that it is significant for an EU member state to recognize Palestine. I mean, on the most basic level, it's very big news because it shows that America doesn't have a monopoly on being an outside negotiator when it comes to the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. That dynamic has largely been the case for most of the second half of the 20th century. And I think that a lot of what you're seeing right now is a belief that America is not acting in good faith when it comes to saying that we need to follow this peace process, and that the peace process is working, and that America is an honest broker between these two parties in good faith on equal measures. I think that was always an illusion, and I think that following the repeated bombings of Gaza, that illusion is becoming even clearer, and the fact that Sweden is stepping up and showing leadership on this issue, I think, is a very clear sign that America's monopoly on sort of diplomatic force, if you will, when it comes to this issue, is waning.
So, I mean, yeah, you're describing, as you say, this monopoly that America has over the negotiations, but Sweden is the first, as you mentioned, long-term sort of Western European country to do this. So why do you think the other European countries haven't stepped up? Do you think it's because of the role that the U.S. is playing? Irritate the U.S.? Like, why hasn't anyone else done this then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, if you look at the U.S.'s closest partners, whether that's Britain, whether it's Australia or Canada, the partners with which it shares the most military intelligence, you see an incredible dependence on staying in the United States' good graces. And I think that the fact that Sweden has really rebuked the U.S. and said that there is no time to wait for this is a really significant thing, because I think that there are a lot of pressures to essentially stay in line and not anger the U.S. for all sorts of obvious economic and military reasons. That said, what you've seen since the announcement in Sweden is various officials there trying to walk the statement back, trying to emphasize that sort of quote unquote both sides need to be respected, which sounds fair kind of in the abstract, but the way that Ali Abu Nima, who's a Palestinian who comments on these issues quite regularly, says, that means that you're talking about treating occupier and occupied equally, and I think that it's important to not oversell what Sweden has done as well, because I think that they've seen the blowback, and I think that there is a certain amount of tempering that we didn't see right at the outset.
Let's talk a bit more about the timing of this. because of course, obviously, it's on the heels of the devastating military conflict that occurred over 7 weeks this summer. Now there's an indefinite ceasefire or a truce even between Israel and Gaza. Do you think that all is very much playing into the timing of this decision? Do you think it's a good time for Sweden to be making this choice?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, I think that this most recent bombing of Gaza, the third round in recent memory, was so horrifying to so many people that it sort of finally punctured the myth that that Israel is acting in self-defense, or at least acting purely in self-defense. And I think that it's a real shame that the only time we talk about Palestine or Palestinians is when they're being blown to smithereens. Now, the fact that the bombing lasted for so long this summer actually kept Palestine on the front burner for a lot of people, especially internationally. And I think that moves like this, like what we're seeing from Sweden, are the result of that. It's also important to note that in the coming weeks, Britain is going to have a similar vote in its parliament, and whether or not Sweden's taking the lead will pressure any British MPs to vote likewise enough so that the measure would pass, I think, is an open question. But it would really be a huge development if Britain broke with the United States on this issue.
We're going to take a break in a second, but I just want to suggest that obviously on one level, this is extremely helpful for Palestine's weight in the negotiations, of course. But is there not something to be said for the messiness of the proximity to this military conflict and everything that has emerged? Like, yes, of course, Israel was the whole thing was messy, but yes, there's a lot of reasons to criticize Israel's conduct over the last few weeks, but it also revealed a lot of very, very unsavory realities about Hamas and how it operates. Don't you think that could be quite a messy element in recognizing Gaza and the PLO together as a state?
Well, I think one of the things that again, to reference Ali Habnima again, over at Electronic Intifada, he actually said that this recognition could be bad for Palestinians because it essentially deals the PLO and Fatah a win. And he is somebody who is very, very critical of Mahmoud Abbas and his parties, who I think many observers see as sort of spineless politicians who don't actually who have had no success in securing any rights of self-determination for Palestinians. So I think that if this recognition is seen as a sort of win for what's referred to as the more moderate factions within Palestinian leadership, whether that will ultimately weaken or strengthen Hamas, I think remains to be seen. There is an argument, though, that if Sweden is continuing to push a two-state solution, which is certainly what it seems like from their statements, a lot of Palestinians have lost faith in the two-state solution. And talking about timing, Israel recently announced, I believe it was 2,500 more settlements in Arab East Jerusalem. And that's really the stories that don't get talked about nearly as much, is that settlements continue to expand, and when the international community isn't watching because there isn't a siege and bombing and the sort of if it bleeds it leads style of news coverage, you have Israel continuing to expand and creating a status quo that I think is simply untenable for many Palestinians.
Well, I have to believe that, spineless is one word. I would go with moderate diplomatic behavior
Sure.
over Hamas any day and hope that it strengthens the PLO if we're looking for a two-state solution, which I think most of us are at this point. But anyway, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from the latest episode of Live Studio featuring the Henry Millers. And we're back with our discussion on Sweden's recent recognition of Palestine. So, John, just a minute ago, you were mentioning arguments that this might actually hinder Palestine's influence in negotiating its own settlement. Do you personally think that? Because it does seem like a win for Palestine on the simplest terms.
I think that it is a win, and I think that that on the most basic level, it is good news in terms of talking about the future of Palestinians. I just think that it's also important to continue to put all of these the breaking news in context, and the context is decades where Palestinians have been told to wait, and they've been told, if you behave well enough, and if you elect the right government, and if you come to the right diplomatic meetings and say the right words, then you'll have your state. And that's been something that Palestinians have been told for decades. And I think that it's important when we look at these significant, I think, diplomatic measures, it is important to keep in mind that many Palestinians have been waiting for their entire lives for something that is not only is it so far in the distance that I think many people can't even imagine what it would look like, but as Israel, as I said before, continues to expand, the metaphor that a lot of people use is that Israel is continuing to eat the pie as it negotiates about who gets which slices.
So I can't imagine that you personally would take very seriously Israel's response specifically to this recent recognition by Sweden, that it's absolutely counterproductive because it's unilateral, and that agreement has to come from negotiations and it has to be mutual between Palestine and Israel. I take it you don't take those very seriously.
No, I don't. I think that Israel has lost any claim to condemn unilateral actions, whether it's their own unilateral actions in the continued blockade and occupation of Palestinian territories, or whether it's the United States' unilateral action on their behalf, vetoing virtually every measure that comes before the Security Council in the UN that would criticize Israel and benefit Palestinians. And when you look at the international stage, Israel and the United States are really, for the most part, outliers in terms of the way that elected officials approach Israel and Palestine. And it's also the case that in the United States, much of the dialogue has been moving to the right and becoming increasingly conservative. And so positions that used to be mainstream, a two-state solution along 1967 borders, are now considered sort of outside the mainstream, and that Palestinians should just be happy with what they have for now. And I think that's that's a kind of unilateralism of its own.
I mean, what about Netanyahu's assertion that he actually wants to resume negotiations, but there's just this ever-present condition that the PLO disassociate itself with Hamas, and specifically that clause about Israel's right to exist and wanting to wipe it off the map? I mean, that seems reasonable in and of itself, right?
Well, Netanyahu can say that he wants to continue negotiations all he wants, but his actions, I think, really show otherwise. I mean, the last time there was the last time that a high-ranking U.S. official went to Israel, when Joe Biden went 2 years ago, there was also an announcement that more settlements had been made, and each time the United States has rebuked Israel on those and has said that these settlements are damaging the peace process. But I think that it's the height of being disingenuous to continue to expand, even though it's upsetting Israel's main benefactor, the United States, who, by the way, continues to give Israel more international aid than it gives any other country. And without the U.S.'s continued international aid, Israel couldn't exist as it does right now. Certainly couldn't exist that way militarily. And so Netanyahu's words, I think, don't go very far when you look at the actions that his government has taken.
Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap up soon. I just want to throw an idea out that this might also be linked to some sort of internal political agenda on Sweden's part, in that the Prime Minister made this announcement as part of his inaugural speech on Friday. So it's a completely new government, and I just wonder if maybe he's trying to make a splash back home, because Sweden as a country doesn't seem to be that involved compared to other countries. I mean, obviously the US, but even Russia. Sweden just doesn't seem to be a big player specifically in the conflict. So what do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, it's like they say, all politics are local, and I'm sure that there are many factors that went into this decision beyond kind of clear-eyed altruism or charity. That's almost never the most satisfying explanation when you're talking about diplomacy or matters of war. And I think that there's a chance that that's the case here. That said, trying to determine the internal motivations of countries when they do happen to act in I think the right way can be beneficial, but it's important to sort of take wins where you can get them if you're concerned about universal human rights like this.
So just very, very briefly, you mentioned Britain. Do you think a lot of other countries are going to jump on this bandwagon?
I honestly don't, because I think that the United States exerts so much force, both sort of in front of the curtain and behind the scenes. I guess Britain is going to be the next major challenge, though. And if Britain goes, then I think at that point that could be a sign that the dam has broken.
Thank you very much, John. We'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a bonus edition of BTR Live Studio this week on BreakThruRadio.com, featuring New Myths. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Be sure to check out BreakThruRadio.com through the weekend for our continued Fine Lines Week coverage, including our story about a satirical federal agency for catching illegal superheroes. That's it for us here at Breakthrough News. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter @BreakThruRadio. I'm Charlotte thun-Hohenstein, and thank you for joining us.